Hello, welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm your host, Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. And I'm excited to be back here adding to the Minidose catalog at Evergreen RX with a really important kind of omnipresent topic, which is about healthy boundaries. So I thought, why don't we go over a little bit of a basic 101 on healthy boundaries so that we can all get on the same page about what they may look like. I know this is a really hot topic. People are always navigating how to set boundaries, how to uphold healthy boundaries. Trust me, I don't have it all figured out either. I'm still struggling with that. They're very complicated. They can be very complicated. But I'm hoping to kind of break it down with some simple tips or steps that might help enable you and make this a quick little easy episode you can come back to whenever you're trying to set a new boundary, if you're wanting a little refresher on what they may look like. I'm hoping to give this as a little guide. Um, just to say, I am not an expert in this, even though, I'm a therapist and I go to a lot of therapy and I, try my best. I'm definitely not an expert, and all of this is just like my opinion on what is healthy boundaries, what that looks like. So if something does or doesn't work for you, that's fine. Just like take it or leave it. So yeah, boundaries seem to be such a like hot button topic. They have been for like I feel like 5 years cuz we've had this whole people pleaser awakening movement and, self-care and standing up for yourself, being confident, like this whole empowerment movement, which is awesome and also can sometimes lean into being a little bit like this is my boundary. And so now I'm going to require something that I'm not actually really like able to require out of someone. Um, but I think that I can because of this whole empowerment movement. So, one thing I want to kind of anchor into in this episode is that boundaries are really about what you can control and your responsibility of upholding what you require in relationships or what you desire. And at the end of the day, you can control you and your actions and not someone else's. So that is like a motto to anchor into is like, what is in my control and what is not. And other people's actions ultimately are not in your control. So, what boundaries enables us to do is to practice clear communication with someone else, give them the opportunity to meet the needs or desires that we are articulating, and to also help us step back from that knee jerk reaction we can sometimes have to want to control someone else or, lightly manipulate someone else through covert backdoor ways. When we're not communicating clearly and we're just doing like indirect ways to try to get what we want, which sometimes people pleasing can look like this, we're really taking somebody else's autonomy away and acting out of a controlling stance, which, can come from a good place or can come from kind of a unintentional place, but still is not the way that we want to be operating in relationships. Ideally, if we want to really foster a lot of trust and safety and commitment and intimacy and all of that, underlying part of intimacy to me is clear communication and giving people the opportunity to do something different and upholding the consequences if they don't and dealing with the disappointment if they don't. So, anyway, that's a long winded way to say that boundaries are like such a hot button topic. And a lot of times I think people are doing it kind of wrong. I'm just kidding. I'm not here to say right or wrong, but I mean, I don't know. So, anyway, first and foremost, boundaries are not rules. So, a rule would be like, you cannot do XYZ. Um, period. End of sentence. A lot of people like to couch that as a boundary, but that's not actually what it is. So, what is it? Let's get into the positive. What is a boundary, at least in my humble opinion? So, I think there's 3 parts to it. We're going to go into each of these parts in more depth, but just to give a lay of the land, to me, A healthy boundary consists of the identification of a need or a want that you have, something that is or is not happening in a relationship that you would like to see change. A clear and definable request. It's kind of the meat of the boundary, but that clear and definable request without the other two parts is a rule, essentially. Um, so, what I think is super important that sometimes gets left off of boundaries is what is the consequence that you're ready and willing to uphold if that clear, definable request is not met? So, that's a really essential piece of this is what are you ready and willing to uphold your responsibility um, if this boundary is not met or is repeatedly not met and it's continuing to create conflict or problems for you. Okay, so let's break it down. I'm going to start with an example of a need or a want that I could identify. So, for example, when I come home from work, I typically need some time to unwind and reset after work. So, it's really not a great time for me to be like communicating with other people, to have people contacting me. So, my desire is that when I get home from work, I have time to unwind and reset. Okay, so I've identified that. Maybe I've identified, when I come home and my boyfriend like wants to talk and wants to hang out, that I'm kind of irritable. It doesn't really work for me. And it's gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, I think I actually should have a conversation about this. So that's the first step, knowing what it is that's not working for you. So then we get to the boundary portion, the meat. Um, so boundaries fall somewhere on a spectrum from rigid to porous. Rigid would be like a brick wall, and porous is like you've got a thin veil in front of you. It's super easy to cross that boundary. Nothing really comes of crossing that boundary. And that would be kind of a failure to uphold those consequences. A wall is a rule, like I was talking about. It's impenetrable, it's super rigid, it's super strict. It kind of makes people feel more shut out than anything else. So, in the example I gave, a rigid boundary would be like, I need time to unwind after work, so do not contact me even in an emergency or urgent situation. That's pretty strict. There's not a lot of flexibility there. Um, you can just feel that. That feels kind of like intense. So then the opposite, a porous boundary in this example would be like, you know, I want to have this time to unwind after work. That's my intention, but oh, somebody called me and they asked me a question or um I'm getting a lot of emails or text or my boyfriend's like really wants to hang out. So, okay, I'll do it. Even though it doesn't feel great to me and I might get a little bit resentful, I'll do it anyway. So that would be porous. Now, Goldilocks, where are we? Where's just right? Where is the perfect porridge or the, most comfortable bed? In this example, in my opinion, it would look something like, for about 2 hours after work, I'm pretty incommunicado, but if there's an emergency or something really time sensitive and urgent, I will respond. Okay, so that's the boundary. Hopefully those examples give you like some sense of like where it falls. I think it can also be kind of like something that you feel into. And if you have a hard time really feeling into what feels too rigid or what feels too porous, maybe you lean towards one or the other and you're trying to come more into the middle. A helpful way to sense into this is like to ask someone else, not the person maybe you're trying to set the boundary with, but a neutral party. Ask them, hey, does this feel fair? Does this feel like an okay thing to require? Is this, do you get the sense that this is a pretty fair ask? That can be helpful to check in with someone, especially if you have a tendency to be, you know, on one extreme end of the spectrum, like maybe more in that people pleaser, porous boundaries um, camp. Even some light level of boundary might feel super rigid to you, or like, oh, I can't request this. So it can help to check in maybe with your friend that uh, is a little bit more well versed in setting those boundaries. Okay, so now on the consequences component of boundary setting. I think it's important to talk about here that there can be levels to boundaries. Maybe at first it's It doesn't even have to be directly communicated. You can just identify this need, identify what you'd like to see change, and kind of, and you don't even have to like explicitly have a conversation with somebody about this boundary. So, an example of this would be like if someone consistently comments on your body and weight that you gained or lost, and you just don't really like that. Maybe first you try by changing the subject with them and seeing, do they take the bait? Do they just change subjects? And over time, does that kind of alleviate this body checking behavior that they have with you? Okay, so you don't even have to directly communicate the boundary. But maybe you notice they still comment and it's bothering you and you want to have a direct conversation. So then you directly communicate the boundary with them, and maybe the consequence starts off smaller. I would really love for you to not make comments on my body, to not talk about the way that I look. If that does happen, um, I'll try to change the subject, and if it continues, I'm going to get off the phone with you. I might end that conversation. So that's one layer. And then if it continues, if somebody's continuing to cross that boundary, the consequence might up. So this is a really important part. We want to make sure that the consequence is kind of equally matched with the behavior. So some people might take to this boundary really quickly and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know I made you uncomfortable. Okay, no problem. So if it happens again and you switch subjects, they're ready to catch on, and great, then you get to move on. But if this is more of a consistent or persistent pattern, and it keeps getting crossed, even when it's explicitly communicated that you would like them to stop doing this, then the consequence might up as well. Like if this continues, it might inform how often you want to see this person. You could say, if you continue to display this behavior and it doesn't seem like there's any changing in that, I may make the choice to spend less time around you. Next time you ask me to go to lunch, I might not be kind of at that place. So how this gets phrased and everything is really up to you and your style and what feels natural to you. But hopefully this is helping illustrate kind of the ladder that we walk up with boundaries as well. It's typically not going to be like a one and done, set it and forget it type of thing. There might be some molding or shaping or compromising that happens as we work with the other person. Because another thing is boundaries are not set in a vacuum, they involve another person. And so how they react, how how easy or difficult it is for them to meet this request, all of those things are going to be taken into account on, the ever evolving process of boundary setting. So going back to my example, for me, the consequence would be for about these 2 hours after work, I want to unwind and reset. And if you contact me, I will not be responding in that time. Okay. So those are kind of the three components: the identifying a need and a want inside of yourself, articulating that need through a clear, definable request, and then knowing the consequence that you are ready and willing to uphold. Sometimes you might say what this consequence is, other times you might just set this boundary without having to like explicitly say what the consequence is. And sometimes all of these components take readdressing and workshopping with the other person, especially when you have like a really like intimate or close personal relationship with them. I'm thinking like romantic partners. There might be some collaboration to get to a place where it feels good or manageable to the both of you, and you're getting enough of what you want out of it that it feels okay. We're not always going to get 100% of our needs and our wants met. So, being open to that, having clear communication, and being able to workshop things is another key component of kind of staying within that flexible range and not becoming too rigid or too porous in what you're expecting out of a relationship. So there we have it. There's a brief little primer on boundaries. I'm sure there's so much more to say and maybe some follow-up questions, because I think most of the time when we talk about something like this, people have direct, very specific questions about situations that they're in, and how to navigate it. So if you have any of those questions, reach out to me. If I get enough, then maybe I could compile them into a episode kind of addressing different examples and situations and giving my direct kind of guidance on how you may go about having a conversation or setting that boundary. But hopefully this equips you with some good information that you can kind of break down for yourself and use moving forward. And something that I just do want to address before signing off is that I think that the biggest thing that we struggle with boundaries can be these beliefs on what we are or aren't allowed to request in relationships. So it's a process, breaking those things down, getting acquainted with this way of clearly communicating and of kind of putting yourself out there, being vulnerable and saying, hey, I want this. Are you able to meet this? And be vulnerable in the way of, if this isn't met, that consequence is for me to uphold. And that might be really disappointing. And maybe I'm not able to be as close with this person as I wanted. But at the end of the day, anchoring into the being able to show up for yourself in that way and knowing that what you want and what you require in a relationship is deserving of attention, is deserving of being kind of met and upheld and not just thrown out the window at the first sign that somebody maybe has some pushback to it. So it's complicated and I'm sure we're all always learning about this, but there's your mini dose. I hope it helped. And if you liked it, share it with a friend, shoot me a message. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And you can always follow me on Instagram, TikTok. I'm at the Evergreen RX and all of those places. If you want to watch the podcast, I post all of the videos on YouTube. So if you're into the visual format, they're there for you. But until next time, I'm wishing you all the best and I'll see you then.